Hey, it's James Murray in the Net News Ledger newsroom, and joining us by telephone is Ontario Regional Chief Isadore Day. Chief Day, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Good afternoon, James.
The issue right now is a political accord that is being signed next week.
Yeah, on August 24th, Monday, we're going to be working with the Ontario government. We will be formally signing off on a political accord that's been in the works for about a year. And James, the political accord, for those First Nation citizens that don't know yet, we have been concerned over the last couple of years with the lack of a working relationship with Ontario. Just to simplify, what that means is, prior to about a year ago, we were only meeting with the Ontario Premier and Cabinet once a year. That's now changed. And, as we sit down at the table on a more frequent basis with the Premier, we've begun to lay out what that means, what the expectations are from First Nations, and, what are some of the things that we want to achieve in a new working relationship. Now that we've set that out in a draft accord, the chiefs have approved it. On Monday, we're going to be signing off on that with my signature and the Ontario Premier. So it's going to be a huge step forward and a historical accord.
Now, in terms of that, this brings sort of treaties and then Treaty Plus to the table, or?
Yeah, certainly. I think I like the concept of Treaty Plus. There is this notion now that we are all treaty people. That seems to be gaining ground and momentum. And the reality is that First Nations are treaty partners, but we have treaty rights and inherent rights. And basically, Ontarians enjoy the treaties. They enjoy the benefit of the treaties. And we now need to have the challenging discussion of there's some history here. There has been a lack of benefit and outcome for us in a positive manner in which way Ontario has benefited from the treaties. We have that, plus we also have rights that are well beyond what the province has. We have inherent rights, and just an example, those are international rights, and we're now beginning to bring those types of discussions in front of the Premier and Cabinet and say, listen, we've got these rights. We have the right to our own jurisdiction in a number of different areas. Let's work together to figure out how we're going to advance and create better lives for our people and First Nations.
And the reality is, as the First Nations communities thrive, so will Ontario and so will Canada.
Well, and that's just it, right? We know that Ontario, in the current state that it is, it's in heavy deficit right now. It's got a challenging issue that it faces in terms of its own economy. It's looking at how to move certain infrastructure around, selling off our Hydro One to get more money for infrastructure. Listen, First Nations need to be part of that agenda now. And, in my work so far, being the regional chief and then prior to setting it up, we've said, listen, we've got to elevate our level of working together. We've got to establish collaboration. We got to get out there into the north. We got to understand what the issues and challenges are in the north, and we want Ontario to help out with that. Let's work together.
Sounds like exciting times to be the Ontario Regional Chief.
Well, it is, and I'll tell you, just looking at the recent NAN elections, my hats go off to former Grand Chief Yesno and the executive. I was just in Aroland, and we're able to help greet the new NAN executive, Alvin Fiddler, and the deputies, and clearly there is new leadership across the board. There's a new momentum, and I think it's exciting because there's a good group of leaders that are coming to the forefront now, and with new energy, new strength, and a lot of abilities. I think we're going to get something done here.
I think it's a good time for that. On Ontario Hydro One, what do you see the issue as covering? Because the province seems to be moving to sell off the assets as quickly as they can.
Well, listen, the Ontario government, I believe, has made a bit of a misstep in miscalculating the issues and concerns that we would raise, first of all, as First Nations. We were not consulted in a meaningful way. This is a major asset. Potentially we're looking at about a $15 billion asset. And, much of the infrastructure runs through many of our communities in our traditional territories. And, First Nations should have been a direct part of that discussion. So if we've got that type of an issue, Ontarians are also raising issues and concerns around the sale of Hydro One. I believe, albeit we have these issues and concerns, the Ontario government has signaled that it is going to go ahead, and First Nations need to prepare. We need to be ready for that discussion, and much of my efforts this past week has been clearly getting ready for some discussions directly with the Minister of Energy and the Premier on this issue.
Well, one of the issues recently, I was up in Deer Lake, and we managed, through covering a story, to have 5 homes that sat for 5 years empty and not hooked up to the grid. They're now hooked up to the grid, and I think a privatized Hydro One would have a really hard time justifying to shareholders and stock, investors spending a lot of money in the north.
Well, and then James, the answer to that is similar to that of what the Muskego people had done with Five Nations Energy. They said, this is our territory, these are our issues, we need to ensure that distribution is our issue. This has got to be a benefit coming back to our people, and we need to have control. This is economic jurisdiction, I believe, James, and it's one where we need to establish and maintain authority on the infrastructure right within our own territory. So this could be a good news story if we do this right. And I think the folks in the north, for all that they've suffered with not being on the grid and being left out of the development mix, clearly I think the north is really poised to say, listen, if anything's going to happen, we're going to do it on our own terms.
It sounds good. Chief Day, thank you very much for taking the time.
Yep, thanks, James. We'll talk to you again.
Take care.